I welcome all of you, distinguished speakers and participants to this webinar, to our second virtual webinar as part of the T28 seminars and roundtables. This is a very important webinar tackling one of the most pressing issues of our time and age, which is about energy. So the title is Empowering Change, Navigating the Pathway to a Sustainable Energy Future. And studies at the University of Jordan. Matteo is from ISPI, the leading European think tank in Rome, based in Rome. We're very delighted to have all of you joining this webinars. Now, look, I would be very much interested to hearing your opening statements about the topic that we're discussing. But mainly what I really would like to do over the hour and a half or so is not only to clarify the term energy security, energy transition, and renewables, and to see one more time, the global geopolitical map that is redrawn around these changes. So it's not only clarifying, but I think to many minds, demystifying. Sometimes it's like a mystery. who's transitioning to what, to where, who's security, all of these questions. So allow me to invite Ms. Victoria to start her opening remarks, and then I will ask Dr. Benjamin to be second, and then Mr. Meher, and then Dr. Matthew. So Ms. Victoria, please, floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity to say some ideas about this topic. Firstly, I want to say that energy transition and energy safety closely to economy safety as well. So firstly, I would like to say first my idea that geopolitical implication of the energy transformation need to be economy safety in the logical of, for example, CBAM transition, and all countries need to be safe in terms of international trade of fossil fuel and another energy trade, because it's a huge investment, and in this way every country need to be need to have some guarantees in terms of international trade. Yes, firstly, we need to think about global issues like reduction of GHG emissions, and it's a global purpose that all we have, but still we need to have guarantees for economy safety as well, and international trade is a part of that. My second idea, it's about GHG reduction and how countries can in what technology countries can do it. So I would like to say about technologically neutral way to do it, and every country needs to choose technologies that, for example, have more economy effects for this country. In this way, it's not only about renewable energy, but nuclear, big hydropower station, natural gas, like transitional fuel, and so on. So all this technology track we need to have if we talk about energy and economy security. So in the next idea that I have connected with the access to the green technologies without any restriction for any countries. So here I would like to say about different R&D that in the field of energy transition that countries can have in some cooperation. Also, I would like to say about different international financing that can be cheaper than in some countries, and everything is really important for energy transition that can need to be global track, not only, for example, for some countries. And my one more idea, it's about just transition, but it's not from the social side, but from the governance side. Here I would like to say that social just transition, it's not only about labor forces and so on. It's also about economy, fiscal, and such level of effects that countries need to use when we say about just transition, because some region just have, for example, fuel economy, and it's part of our life. So here it's really important for energy safety and energy transition as well. Thank you very much. This is my ideas.
Well, thank you so very much, Ms. Victoria. And this is an excellent beginning. Technology, social impact, and of course, just the transition, economic and the trade, all of these things, financing this transitioning as well, are part of the ideas that you try to provide in a more coherent fashion. So I'll get back to you, trying to just detail what you think of these things. But now let me invite Dr. Benjamin to share with us his thoughts about this topic.
Thanks so much, and yeah, thank you, and thanks so much for the invitation to be a part of this panel. So I think I'd like to place my opening comments in a bit of a larger context, which is to think about energy futures in a larger context of what we're now sort of calling climate resilient development, which is really economic development that achieves sustainable development while also tackling the challenges posed by climate change and sort of demand and need for a clean energy future. And part of the reason why I sort of picked that frame is because this was a central theme of one of the chapters from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's Sixth Assessment Report for Working Group 2, happened to be a chapter that I was a lead author on. And in that chapter, we talk about big system transitions that are needed to achieve sustainable development. And I think these are relevant to both the global north and the global south, major developed economies, as well as lower income countries. And the big transitions are certainly achieving big transitions in energy systems. And I think that transition is well underway. But it's linked to other systems, industrial systems, our infrastructure, how we manage land use, agriculture. And there's also a very big social component to this, because it's sort of people that are driving transitions, and it's people that are affected by these transitions. And I think where we landed in our chapter, and when we discuss these sort of different system transitions, is that they're going to be disruptive. They're going to disrupt economies. They're going to disrupt financial systems. They're going to be socially disruptive. And as Victoria just mentioned, and as we're seeing around the world, they're going to be geopolitically disruptive. And we'll talk about that more during this particular webinar. And that's fine. I mean, some of these disruptions are by design. The rapid deployment and transition in renewable energy is by design. We are trying to incentivize and accelerate that part of the transition. But some of this disruption is going to occur by accident. For example, if we drive up the cost of energy, whether it's here in the United States or anywhere around the world, that's going to exacerbate energy poverty. That's an unintended consequence of this transition. It's a negative disruption and ultimately undermines energy security for certain populations. So from our standpoint, a key as we move forward with these transitions is to manage them so as we maximize human well-being, maximize the well-being of the broader environment and its ecosystems. So how we do that, part of that is by emphasizing the importance of security, particularly resilience and reliability of energy systems. Part of that is having a functional marketplace that can drive innovation and transfer technologies between countries in different contexts. That's part of the sort of financial and business aspect of that. And part of this is going to be developing sort of the incentives and change social norms that tend to, that to date has sort of slowed transitions, resulted in inequality both within countries and between countries, because we're going to have to just effectively live and manage our systems in a different way moving forward if we're going to successfully achieve these transitions. So I'll leave it at that, but look forward to the discussion.
Wonderful, Benjamin. Thank you so very much. So this is indeed a larger context that you place the talk of this webinar within, including, of course, resilience in terms of climate and environment and the energy future. But the disruptive incidents or disruptive nature of what's going to be happening is also very inviting. Not only in terms of whether it happens naturally or it's caused, and how we link in that to the industrial, trade, market, social and then more importantly, a sustainable energy system for everyone, which will lead us to talk about geopolitics, security, and regulation. So I thank you for that. And I'll take it now to Mr. Meher Sharma to share his insights with us. Please.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Edat. And I will, I'd just like to say that I agree on all points with the two speakers before me. I do have a couple of additional ways in which I think we perhaps should be thinking about the energy transition at this point, some of which are the ways that I think about them, and some of which I am ventriloquizing what many people in the global south, in the developing world, and in India, as one of the larger countries in the developing world, believe we should be considering the energy transition at this point in time. The first is questions related to energy security. And I think over the past year and a half, especially since the invasion of Ukraine, we have become very concerned in the developing world about the fluctuation of energy prices, and we have it has been recalled to us that this is of that controlling that fluctuation is of vital interest to our internal security and to our welfare. We have also, I think, noted that while the pressure on us to move forward with our energy transition has not decreased, there are parts of the world which have in fact gone back to coal in their desire to cut off access, for example, to Russian gas. So we are not exactly certain where that leaves a shared view on the speed and scale of the energy transition at times of problematic security. And I think that it's a little hard for us to talk to developing country governments today and tell them to speed up when they have seen external actions that slow down the energy transition to this degree. That's the first point. The second point is that even before the Russian invasion of Ukraine, we were very certain in India and in many other parts of the global south that our energy transition is conditional on finance. This is not because we are sulking or are being difficult. It's just a fact of life. It's going to cost a large amount of money for us to build out the infrastructure required, to build out the renewable infrastructure required, even if we are completely technology neutral about it, and to update our grids, to ensure that people at the point of purchase can access, whether it's rooftop solar or whatever. A lot of this requires money, and it requires new financial systems. And the fact is that while we have seen money go into certain classes of in the energy transition, so large-scale grid-connected renewable solar energy, yes. Everything else, not so much. And we continue to insist that it is connected to, our success in this will be connected to the availability of finance, and that's just a given. And it should always be front of mind. Third point is just to follow through on Ms. Koksharova's question of justice. She very importantly said that we have to be just in terms of recognizing the fiscal stress that moving away from older fuels puts on some of us. And that's very true in the case of even a net energy importer like India, because what the Indian government will not normally say with great pride on the public stage, but it's nevertheless true, is that given that it is an importer and distributor of fossil fuels domestically, it makes money from fossil fuels. Right, so it makes money from the import and the distribution of fossil fuels. And when we move away with fossil fuels, in which to its credit, the Indian government, like many other developing countries, is doing quite quickly, it will lose that source of revenue, and it will lose the way to pay for other budgetary requirements. This is not the case in many other parts of the world. But it is doubly the case in some parts of the world. And so we have to recognize that there is a different fiscal implication of the energy transition in different parts of the world. And so therefore the speed at which governments will want to sign up to it will have to be viewed through that lens. And the final point is about geopolitics. And I just said India, like many countries in the Indo-Pacific, Japan, like many developing countries in the African continent, is a net importer of refined energy. We believe that this has had a continuing effect on our economic and national security that we are not happy about over the past 60 years, right? And furthermore, it has meant that a flow of wealth out of the country over the past decades. One of the appeals of renewable energy was and is the thought that it will be able to create wealth domestically in terms of when it comes to the generation and distribution of energy. If it is the case, however, that what goes into making renewables, whether it is critical minerals, whether it is the infrastructure that creates, photovoltaic cells, whether it is the technology that behind batteries, if the patents for these, if the minerals for these, and if the ownership of these and the production of these is elsewhere, then once again, we will have an unequal energy economy. And we are building an unequal energy economy, and many of us in the global south will not be happy with that. So these are the 4 points I just want to leave you with, and I'm sure can explore any of them later on if you like.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Meher. This is profound. And I'm delighted that you're starting with the energy transition, because they're going to be my exact next topic that we need to, as I said, demystify. And, bringing this global dynamics south-north, and then the financing of this transitioning and how its impact on different parts of the world, and then who's benefiting, who's not. And of course, the geopolitical impacts, especially in countries who've been for too long net importer, and now where we at this geopolitical map. I'll take it to you, Matteo, to shed a light on this topic, and then we take it to a second level. So, Matteo.
Thank you so much. I think that to start, I'm going to echo what Mihir said, mostly, and Benjamin as well. So first of all, it's true, we've seen exactly the fact that the dilemma of the energy transition has always been a trilemma, right? We need to accelerate the transition at affordable prices in a secure way. And the secure way has been, somehow overshadowed by all the others, but with Russia's, not just Russian invasion of Ukraine, but the fact that Russia was able to corner the EU market in such a way, in a very easy way, and in a very clever and shrewd way at first, shows that these disruptions by design that Benjamin was talking about can also be coupled by disruptions by accident or by geopolitical events. And that means that we need to gauge the energy transition under that light as well. And to me, I think that my first point is the intersection between geopolitics and the just transition. Because Mihir was saying something that to me, it really resonates. It shows what in 2022 really happened in the world and not just in the EU. So a regional crisis in the EU has precipitated, let's say, global crisis or regional crisis elsewhere. The truth is that gas prices in Europe are tightly connected with those in Asia. We knew that for at least a decade, but we hadn't seen in practice how tightly they were connected until the Russian crisis kicked in. The Russian cornering of the EU market managed to, push all the EU looking for LNG, and that meant that all the liquefied natural gas that was available in the Asian market came flowing to the EU, and the EU, of course, was to us, I'm a European, I'm an Italian, was precipitating in an energy crisis that was also a price crisis, but it was incomparably lower from what some other countries in Asia have experienced because of our own need of liquefied natural gas, right? So we've seen Sri Lanka and Pakistan and Indonesia in some ways and Bangladesh in some ways being pushed towards fiscal crisis, financial crisis that were, due to food and energy crisis at first, and the raw inability to procure the same energy at the same prices. So for Europe, it was just a matter of, it's true, it increases energy poverty as well, but it's a very different way of how affordable energy is. And so again, we are all connected. This crisis has shown it. Just the US market was, very insulated in our own view. But in the end, if you look at it, I guess from the US view, still a quadruple in prices in natural gas prices for Biden, still totally incomparable to Europe and Asia. So for me, it's how these two things and the geopolitical events are connected. And finally, just to conclude this statement, we have a dilemma in our future that is tied to the transition. So let's say if Russia managed to corner the gas market, can China corner the green transition market in the same way, given that let's say the oligopoly or monopoly in some of the raw materials needed or the processing of those materials is heavily in China's hands. So, of course, governments now have a huge, let's say, challenge in their hands, which is how can we make that transition affordable in the same where the balance is, right? The more secure we want to make it, so internalize the production or the processing of those materials that we need for the green transition, the more pricey, the more costly it's going to be. So where is the needle gonna fall? And again, disruption by design. We want prices to go up for fossil fuels, but also by accident. So will China corner market? These questions to me, are what I really focus on day by day in my daily job, and I think they will really mark our next decades of navigating through the transition. That's it. Thank you.
Matteo, this is brilliant. Thank you. And so what? Let China control the renewable and Russia control the gas. We don't have a crisis. It's your problem. You deal with it. That's what everyone's saying, right? So that's where politics and geopolitics determine, to far extent, the dynamics of technology, of science, and of course of economics. Now, by these statements and this very deep delving into the issue, now I need to focus it more, if you allow me. And I will invite you, Dr. Benjamin, to start commenting and reacting to what I'm going to raise as a question and as a comment as well. Now we'll start with energy transition. So the very term energy transition, assuming that we're transitioning from to, and there's kind of either agreements or many players leading that, and certainly there are motivations, reasons why we have to do that, and then a status of that transitioning, where we at in this transitioning, and then who's benefiting and who's not benefiting, losers, winners of this transitioning. And of course, the big question, whether it's going to be achieved or not, and when, and with whom, and by whom. All these questions are for you, Mr. Benjamin, to answer them in less than 2 minutes. How's that? Well, I'll give you three. I'll give you three. Now, this is for all of us. This is going to be the second topic that we'll be discussing. And this is what I meant by demystifying. Because, the issue of decarbonization and moving away from fossil to other kind of is not only and basically an economic driven, which is of course an important move, but it is geopolitically motivated as well, and of course for some other reasons. That's the crisis Matthew was referring to. So Benjamin, educate us about this. What is the whole thing, this transition thing?
Great. Well, I'm not sure if I can educate this audience, but I'll offer a few comments. I mean, I think that the opening question of what are we talking about when we talk about a transition, much less a transformation, might be the big question for this particular session and this webinar that we're in. And I think the big question is sort of transition to what? And I think we haven't really done a good job of answering that question, because I think different countries, different populations, different regions have a different answer to what it is we're trying to achieve. What is the objective function of the energy transition? Some believe, what we're trying to achieve is address climate change. Full stop. In and of itself, that's the problem. I think that's very incomplete and even naive. Many countries are still, trying to transition to simply a secure energy future where they don't have energy poverty, where they're not dependent upon other nations with which they are maybe friends or enemies for their energy resources, and that is paramount to their future security and future development. Like many aspects of geopolitics and international economic development, we're not all on the same page in terms of what we're trying to achieve. And I think ultimately, if we respect where different countries are, we have to treat this like a multi-objective challenge, which is, yes, we need to address climate change. Yes, we need to provide energy security. Yes, we need to address energy poverty while also dealing with all the externalities. And that's what makes us so, so difficult. But we need to be honest that we're probably seeking different things and prioritizing different things. What's the status, right? Well, and when I talk about the energy transition, at least, I always say this is well underway, and I think that's correct. At least with respect to certain technologies, right? And I think, as this sort of came up earlier, it applies to two things: the development and penetration of solar technology globally. It applies to wind energy in certain parts of the world, particularly the global north. And it applies to the sort of demise of coal, again, in certain parts, of the world. So from the U.S. perspective, renewable energies are taken off quite rapidly, and coal has been in decline quite rapidly. So from our perspective, wow, this is a very rapid change from what we were expecting just 10 years ago. But the transition doesn't look like that in many, many other parts of the world, right? Therein lies a bit of a challenge is how do we move all countries forward? It comes back to this issue, particularly of finance, but not just finance. It's access to resources and the geopolitical question and internal policies and incentives. In terms of, who are the winners and losers? I mean, that's a big question that we spend a lot of time thinking about just domestically, within the United States. We have, even within a wealthy country like the United States, we have very different energy system, very different energy portfolios, different energy policies, and the transition is in different stages of development. I think we are certainly some nations, including the United States, see the opportunity to win in the transition to clean energy. And that's, the cornerstone of the Biden administration's domestic policies, is to couple addressing climate change with economic development, job growth, and innovation. And the idea is, particularly northern countries, Western countries can essentially benefit and win by rapidly pursuing the energy transition. But the question is what's our willingness to share in those opportunities and those benefits around the world? And can we do that? Can the U.S. win without other countries losing? And my sense is that the answer right now is no, and a lot of additional changes need to be put in place if we're going to have a more equitable and, to Victoria's point, just transition. So I'm sure that was more than 3 minutes, so I'll stop.
Thank you, Benjamin. This is very, very good. And yes, so first of all, different priorities and goals for different players and stakeholders is definitely defining the way we look at the reasons, at the whys, and also at the status. So it might look very much underway for a country like the United States, the transition, of energy, but also it might look way far away for some other countries who are relying on different sources of energy for their economic development and social lives. But this is important to keep in mind. And of course, we'll continue trying to find out about this transition and the big question: transition to what? And demystifying the idea that this transition is caused by climate change, because this is one of the factors, but it's not the dominant or the only factor that is actually leading. And why we don't keep in mind thinking of competitions over resources and resources as a new resources of power and power distribution. So my division has to do actually with maybe domestic players more than anything else. But this is again for all panelists. But Victoria, your reaction to what colleagues in this webinar have been saying and what Benjamin said about this transition, why, where we at, and where we go.
Yeah, thank you. So I would like to add that when we talk about energy transition, we need to say about long-term and short effects here. And of course, when we talk about long-term, here we talk about a lot about climate changes, about goals of century, and so on. But here also we have short or mid-term goals. And how Dr. Preston says that here we on the different points, and we have different priorities and goals and issues actually. So, and it's not about climate change, because it's about I don't know, end of the century. But here we need to solve different issues with prices, energy poverty, capacity, budget, trade, and so on. So in this way, I think that in energy transition we need to find some common problems, and it's really hard to find, because develop and a fast-growing country and so on have different issues to solve. So for every country, energy transition has the aspects, and it's not only about green energy. So what I would like to say.
Well, thank you very much. It's very important, and that's a trigger actually again, reinforcing the same question one more time and take him to Mr. Meher Sharma. Especially giving that point from Global South, you've been talking about, India and Japan, for example, and their role in this global energy market. So how you see this transition from your point of view, and main causes and status of the transition as we speak today?
Thank you, Dr. Yadav. I think that the point that Dr. Preston made, which is that it is not merely climate change that set us on this path, is one that we have to internalize if we're going to speed up the transition. I think that for many countries, the appeal of a shift in their core fuels arose not just from the possibility that new industry would create jobs, but also from the hope that it would reduce external dependence and thereby improve their national security. And also that it would reduce their external vulnerability financially. In India, we have had balance of payments crises that have brought us close to bankruptcy every time there's been a war in the Middle East. And our liberalization, economic liberalization, which began in 1991, occurred essentially as a consequence of the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait, because we ran out of money. And we ran out of money because the price of oil spiked. And our domestic finances and those of multiple other countries around the world in our position have been for a very long time dependent upon spikes in the price of energy. And the hope was that we would be able to escape that and reach an area, a time of energy price security through the energy transition as well. So there are multiple things driving us. It is a desire to be insulated from the cutting off, for example, of shipments of gas or oil from outside. Is it a desire to be insulated from the rise in prices and thereby internal bankruptcy? And also a desire, hopefully, to try and create a new domestic industry around the products that feed the energy transition. And finally, also very much there, it's 45 degrees here in Delhi, concern about carbon mitigation and adaptation. So all these things are driving the actions of countries in the global south and in the Indo-Pacific in particular, which has been very vulnerable to the geopolitics of this. So I think we have to take them on board when we design policies that are intended to accelerate this transition going forward.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Sir Matthew, now you have a full plate to deal with. So tell us.
Yeah, so Zaid, coming back to your words, because I think they were very interesting when you mentioned or hinted at the fact that countries are transitioning not just due to climate change. I would actually argue maybe the contrary. They are transitioning due to climate change, but they are reacting different ways. So this interaction between the need to transition and other policy priorities and national security priorities is actually very interesting and very peculiar country by country. But what I would argue, when somebody tells me that the energy transition will bring us towards a world that's less dependent on, let's say, on foreign, on other countries, I don't know, availability of resources and so on, I would argue it's not true, unless we are China, at least for now, right? Because for China, the industry is there, and it's more than 100% than what is needed for the transition right now in many places, maybe not for batteries, but for wind turbines and solar panels for sure. And in most stages of the development of both. It is not for many other countries. And when we see, when we think about spikes in fossil fuels prices, the oil prices especially, and now natural gas prices last year, but think about, spikes in lithium prices, in nickel prices, or not just raw materials, but wind turbine prices. If we all want to transition at the same time, and the production is that fixed amount, and it's only improving incrementally every year, so we will still have crisis during the transition, and of course, the hope for many countries is to do like China, right? To be able to internalize at least part of the industry so that you can benefit from it industrially and also be more independent from what caused balance of payment crisis. But again, the transition itself, if we think about it as a goal to make ourselves independent, we're really losing focus on what really matters, which is positioning each country in a way that really makes you more secure at a time in which what is dominant is, let's say, variable, intermittable, but new renewable sources that will dominate the market in the future. So for me, I think that this, balance between what we need to do, which is transitioning, and also what our industry needs to do in order to be more secure instead of less secure in a world that is now depending on new sources of electricity production, is what's really gonna shape our sense of security, and also what our industry needs to do in order to be more secure instead of
well, Matt,
less
I'll stick with you since you try to counter the argument. I see the validity of what you say, but at the very end, we say the same thing. It's so the main reason factor for this transitioning business and lies actually in the national security agenda, national priorities more than anything else. Now, combine that with reactions to climate change makes it even much more national security issue. And that's where the problem is, because as Tristan, what Dr. Preston said about priorities and the competing different priorities among different players, whether domestically or internationally. And for that, I would like you to share with us your knowledge of the distribution of power, if you wish. This is I'm borrowing from the geopolitical and IR, international relations, of the main player now in this transition to renewable and different kind of energy. So who's who, and where are the resources? I'm not talking about technology now, nor finance, just normal natural distribution. And I'm leaving away, again, the economic incentive structures for businesses and others to come in. I just need to see a map of where these new sources of new energy are located and who are the main players. Can you please?
Yeah, why not? I was thinking, in terms of soft power, I would argue that the distribution of this kind of soft power, the need to transition and so on, is still focused pretty much in the advanced world, and the push for it is still there. The acknowledgement of the fact that the need for transition is there is seeping through in many developed countries. Sorry if I speak for India, it's not my job, but I was thinking about India because it's so interesting, because, compared to China, it is still not placed to do, to lead this kind of transition industrially. Still, it has such a huge way to go and potential to lead the transition its way. And on the other hand, if the transition was not what was needed, I would argue that maybe India would stick with coal with much more time than the prospects are not right now. And Poland, for instance, in Europe as well, right? If you have a domestic way to feel more secure, and Poland does have one, which is to use more coal, you would stick with it. And of course, in a world in which the clean transition is not needed, you will still have coal prices much more below than they are today. That said, where are the forces for the transition? I would say something that is very much neglected and only now is surfacing is that developing countries, Latin America, do have raw resources, and have often in the past decades been exploited for them. Let me just take the Democratic Republic of Congo, right? And it's huge amounts of nickel, or huge amounts of uranium, and so both things that we need if we want to do some nuclear power, and if we want to enhance the energy transition in wind and solar. They are now looking in ways to internalize more and more the second parts of the processing part, and not just the extraction part of those raw materials that are there. And so to, let's say, climb up at least a bit of the value chain and retain more of the value in the market of those things, those raw materials. And so not technology, as you said, Zaid, but raw materials themselves now are playing a huge part. Let's, take Chile, take Democratic Republic of Congo, take Pakistan. Every single country that is developing now knows that if they want to, foster development through the transition, they need to have a better deal on these materials. This means a bit higher prices internationally of all those materials, at the same time, a bit more value retention in those countries, and possibly, let's hope for the best, more pushes and support for development in those countries that have often been neglected by the international community, and have often been, the last to catch up or to benefit from the, technological progress over the past century.
Oh, thank you, Matthew. I was thinking of three emerging new powers in terms of resources and a little of technology, leave alone United States and Europe for now, but China for the solar system, Australia, and then Congo for the resources you just mentioned. So, and we need to reflect on this map and how it is actually interacting with the entire geopolitical setup of energy distribution. And at this point, I take it all to Mr. Meher Sharma too, because India was mentioned as well. So your reaction to what Matthew was saying?
Thanks. I think that's a very important point. the fundamental counterfactual is probably not wrong. If there was no carbon problem in our atmosphere, like everyone else in history, India would be burning its coal. And I'll be frank, we would be a lot richer today than we are. We would have had 15 years of intensive coal burning of the kind that made China a middle-income country. When China was growing, when China had reached the per capita income that India is today, they had intensively burnt their coal for 15 years. We have not burnt our coal for the same 15 years. We have tried to shift away from it. We have had higher energy prices. And as a consequence, we have not had the competitive edge in manufacturing that allowed China to grow. And this is just a fact. Well, there's no turning away from it. Countries, India and countries like India, have already sacrificed an enormous chunk of growth and a decade plus or a generation of young people to fighting the climate crisis.
But Mayor, this is only one part of the coin. I mean, one side of it. So it's true, of course. I mean, this conversion that you provided, but there are different reasons, of course, and other factors that contributed to the varying degrees of development among China and India. Not the least, of course, the type of political system. But this is for another discussion. So I just wanted to...
I'm just saying to be absolutely clear.
Yeah.
What we are asking of all the countries in the global south now that are seeking to become upper middle income is to achieve that without coal.
Yeah.
And that has never been done before. And as I said, Chinese wealth and its manufacturing edge was born on the basis of cheaper energy. And as a consequence, that means that we have to find another path for growth for multiple countries in the global south that also provides them with a competitive edge. Now, because that has been how countries have grown traditionally. Now, I don't see that happening currently. What is the other way in which we could see that happen? Let's look at the list of 3 that Dr. Villa identified. One, of course, is a fairly wealthy country, Australia. Let's chuck them out. But let's look at the DRC, for example, right? The Democratic Republic of Congo in the 1950s is one of the very few countries that has seen its per capita income go down over the past decades. I think they, like everybody else, will want to see that process reverse, especially now that the minerals that they possess are of vital importance. That said, how is it that we avoid the errors that were made in the past with, for example, countries that had hydrocarbons? Who will invest in the DRC in such a way that it has agency domestically? How will we manage the multinational companies that will form to control the supply chain? Where will they be from? Will they all be Chinese? Looks like it currently, because nobody in the West seems interested in developing or investing in the kind of dangerous business that the future of critical minerals is going to be. Where are the great? There was the United. There's SR. There was Standard Oil. Where are the equivalents for the future?
Yeah.
Who are the people building those supply chains? Where is the investment coming into the DRC from? It's easy for us to sit and complain that the Chinese will manage the extraction and processing of every critical mineral in the world if none of our companies are willing to invest in it at all. But that's the case. So we have to figure out if we get the investment, then we'll be able to spread the wealth. If you create a cartel, we'll be able to spread the wealth, but I don't see how else we're going to do it.
All right, let's see what we can do. Let's take it to Russia. Russia always has a solution. So, Victoria, what do you think in terms of this transition, distribution of resources, and the cartel of investments that we need to create?
Yeah, unfortunately, here I don't have any answers and solutions, but I wanted to stress that it's a really interesting question. What is a picture of the future for new powers of and countries because of minerals for renewable energy and so on. And here it's with the high risks of such investments, it's really interesting how what's pictures of players we will have in the future. Only China or, for example, Russia as well, or different countries. And here it's a really big question, actually, because of risks that we have. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Victoria. I see your point. Now, this is very interesting, and certainly, organizers of these webinars have helped for these answers. But this transition business is an opening question, and needs a lot of efforts and a lot of thoughts. And I think we should agree to revisit this topic in more thoroughly, just focusing on the transitioning issue. But now I'll take it to another not level, but different point of view, different putting different lenses to looking at it. And this is the issue of energy security. And Benjamin, this is going to be for you first. So when we say energy security, I have two questions: what security, and whose security? And these are, determined questions. Now, I can, like all of you and others who've been into this business, we can think, of course, of resources, supply chain, affordability, and security. But the very term of energy security today is very much integrated in the geopolitical and strategic global interactions. So in your mind, Dr. Princeton, what energy security means, and what is the status of energy security globally today?
Okay, I mean, when I think about energy security, I think about there's two dimensions to it, to put it simply. So one is sort of security of energy supply. It's, can individuals, corporations, nations, do they have access, an affordable access to the energy that they need to achieve their objectives? Whatever those objectives are, and as we've already talked about, many different actors will have different objectives. And it's that sort of security of supply is sort of why you see a lot of the variation in how different nations are addressing the transition, because they have different energy options. Right. But the security of supply is paramount. So, we have to keep the lights on. If I have to use coal to keep the lights on, then I will use coal to keep the lights on. If I have other options, then that are affordable, then that's great. You start to explore those other options. But as I often talk about it, when we, in the context of energy transition, maintaining reliability and resilience is critical. And we in the United States are spoiled, no doubt, but the idea that it's basically unacceptable to have energy that's unaffordable. It's unacceptable to have outages, right? Whether it's electricity or oil and gas, that's just not tolerable, and therefore we sort of manage our systems to minimize the risk of that. Other parts of the world, of course, deal with this on a daily, hourly basis, but there's a security supply issue. The other way I think about this is a security from harm. And this is, how do we ensure that the energy systems and resources that we're relying upon are not undermining development, are not undermining human well-being, are not undermining the integrity of the natural environment. And of course, what we've seen really in sort of the history of the evolution of energy is that fossil energy creates large and diverse kinds of harm for global society. Obviously, harms in terms of global ecological disruption, not only climate change, but land use change, environmental pollution, acidification of the oceans, et cetera, et cetera. The fact that you do have essentially energy colonialism, which has certainly caused extensive harms, particularly in the global south. Even within countries of the global north, issues around environmental justice, implications of energy extraction and use on things like air quality, water quality, very real, demonstrable, and some of the more significant environmental harms that exist around the world are caused by energy systems. And so the promise here that we talk about, and we talk about renewable energy, is we can secure supply, eliminate the harm, and do all that at low cost. But we're clearly not there yet.
Good luck with that.
Good luck to all of us.
No, I know you absolutely just nailed it. It's absolutely seen from the part forward that supply, no harm, and then the affordable cost. But also, because of competitions over the limited supply, because the uncertainty of the transition, this competition creating another security dilemma that engage in national security being seen at stake, where states actually engaging in wars and other kind of acts in order to make sure that their supply, the energy supply chains, is enforceably secured. And this is, again, one more important aspect of energy security. Now, Mr. Meher, I'll take it to you, and I know you have to leave soon, which is too bad. So I'll just, I'll throw so many questions at you and make use of them as you wish. So I have a question coming from the audience, from Ahmed Shikara. And Ahmed been very active participant with us. Thank you very much, Ahmed. And he says we have the UN 2030 Agenda of 17 Sustainable Development Goals. How much we are advanced towards these goals, particularly in the developing world, in translating theory into practice. Otherwise, many of us are losers in the MENA region. So this is with the security questions that I have in mind, that I raised to Dr. Benjamin, is also for you. And one last thing for you also to react in businesses. Why private business will come into very uncertain, very, volatile market, and what kind of incentives they have to do so, and where the technologies are, who's having them, who have monopoly over technology in this transitioning to make the transition and to make it secure. So, Mr. Meher, please.
Right, you've raised 4 questions, and I'll attempt to answer all of them as quickly as possible. First, on Mr. Shahara's question about the SDGs. Energy access, of course, part of the Sustainable Development Goals. I think the broader context of his question is very important, which is that the SDGs were formulated in 2015 for work to be completed by 2030. We are halfway through the development goals period, and our progress as a globe has not been great. So it's been a little short of what we would have liked to have seen. That's not entirely beyond, that has been in part beyond our control. There was a global pandemic. One of the effects of the global pandemic was to sharply increase the debt load across the developing world, to reduce the fiscal space available to governments to spend on welfare. How that relates to our conversation today is that governments that in end 2019 could sit back and think of climate change and welfare as both priorities that they could manage from domestic financial resources, today are looking at those as those 2 priorities, sustainable development and climate change adaptation and mitigation, as competing in some sense for a much more limited pile of domestic financial resources and fiscal space. So a more constrained, poorer governments across the developing world is a bit of a problem going forward for these twin agendas, the climate change and sustainable development that we have ahead of us. And we have to take that on board when we make our plans about the energy transition and about the green transition more generally. The second point that you raised was about are we entering an age of, in fact, in which military confrontation might be possible over securing the future, your energy future. I think we're a few years away from it still, but let's be frank. When we have conversations today about choke points that may come in a hypothetical, hopefully, invasion of Taiwan in our supply chains, it's almost a dry run for our future. Taiwan is a choke point in all our supply chains because they produce semiconductors. In the future, there will be countries like this that will produce nickel, that will produce certain critical minerals, that will have control over certain processes that will become crucial in the energy systems of the future. And those countries will become vital, and we will have to protect them from the kind of geopolitical turbulence that today we have seen Taiwan is subject to. So no, we're not there yet, but I am fairly certain that national security and strategic establishments across the world are worrying how soon we will be there. And I have every expectation, tragic though it may sound, that in our lifetimes, people will die of this. And it's something that people have died over our previous forms of energy, and they're likely to die over this as well. Hopefully, many, many fewer will die. We have an opportunity today to set up the systems that will ensure that it is a more equitable and transparent sharing of the wealth than we've ever had before. And what does that require? And that takes us to the next point that you raised, which is we need the private sector to step up. And you asked what it will take. I talked about the big companies that helped develop the fossil fuel supply chain earlier. Why aren't they getting into this supply chain to the same degree? And you answered that. It's risky. And frankly, the profits to be made don't necessarily justify the risks that they'll have to take from the point of view of these companies. We are doubling down on this kind of behavior by the private sector. Why are we making it increasing their incentives to stay home? By actions such as, for example, the Inflation Reduction Act, by all the various subsidies that all our countries are giving to our own companies to spend money domestically on the energy transition. If it turns out that I can rely on somebody else to bring critical minerals to my shore, but receive state subsidy to use those critical minerals domestically, my energy in the private sector is definitely going to go into lobbying for the state subsidy and staying domestic. So we're not going to see people step up to build those supply chains unless they're given an incentive to do so or kicked out the door by their own governments. And currently, the only government kicking their companies out of the door is China. So, and we will live with the consequence of this choice 10 or 15 years down the line. And finally, on technology, in fact, thanks for bringing this up, because this is in fact one of the things that we should be most worried about. In the developing world, we saw the last 2.5 years as a dry run for the sharing of technology in a crisis. If it is the case that in the future, vital technologies will determine who lives and who dies in the times of the climate crisis, we can't rely on existing systems to get life-saving technologies out to the developing world. We saw that with vaccines. And everyone in the developing world has taken one lesson from the pandemic, which is that if anybody can hold on to technology and hoard it and ensure that even when it is life-saving technology, they will. So we have to try and overcome that fear as well. We have to find mechanisms that will maybe put technologies in common ownership, that will allow us in advance to become co-owners of crucial technologies, that will allow the dissemination of these across boundaries. Because otherwise, it will just be too uncertain for us in purely technological terms to try and invest in the green transition. And I think so these are 4 big uncertainties that we really have to deal with. And thank you very much. And I apologize, but it's a little late in India, and I do have an official dinner to go to. So, thank you very much for your time. Thank you, Dr. Preston, Ms. Koksharova, for your insight. I thought it was very valuable.
Well, Mr. Mayor, I can't thank you enough. This was wonderful. This is very thorough and deep answers, the 4 points you reacted to. So I appreciate that. And well, bon appetit for your official dinner. Was great having you. Looking forward to see you in person. Bye-bye, Mr. Mayor. Now, Victoria and Benjamin, I'll take it back to you and start with you, Victoria. And within your answers to what I can raise, please also, if you have any closing remarks, please say them, because they're going to be your last, time to speak in this webinar. But before that, I have 2 housekeeping things. I have questions. So one question coming from Mohammed Al-Sanusi. Mr. Mohammed is a lecturer at political economy, economics and political science, I think in Cairo. So he's asking questions to Matthew about how China can reconcile its emissions limits with the size of its consumption of fossil oils. I'll tell you what we're going to do, Dr. Mohammed. Please send us your email, and we'll have Matthew email you what he thinks about how to reconcile that. So thank you for your contribution and participation in this webinar. But I also have Atul Koshek. And the question is, the discussion exposes fault lines in global governance. Can we think of a better governance of the global commons in the seas going forward? And, Victoria, I'm bringing this to you because we need to talk about global governance of energy and energy market, energy security, and business and technology. So, floor is yours, Victoria.
Yeah, it's really a complicated question about global governance and how it could impact on the energy transition as well, and which kind of mechanism they have to impact on, because how we discussed before, every country has different priorities for now, and actually different financial opportunities as well. So in this way, even if we talk about global governance, we say about the same countries that they have the same budgets as well. So and here we need to talk, we can see firstly in the level of global governance how hard to discuss financial questions actually about how to spread different financial level from developed to developing countries, for example, and how to share limited financial resources that we have. So, of course, I hope that we will find some more effective way to share with the limited resources, and it would just increase the effectiveness of global governance as well. Yeah, but for now, for example, world they have some ways to improve this, and Paris Agreement, one of the source of this solving this problem. I hope we will have some answers soon.
Well, but Victoria, the issues of the role of private business in this energy transition.
Yeah, of course, of course, of course. Now I just talking mostly talking about side of the governments in governance side, but when we talk about private companies, here also we have issues with different economic questions and profit. So, and more profitable way to do something here, it's actually a more complicated question about effectiveness of governance. And so we need to find balance, like, I don't know, we need to find balance in energy
Right.
security, national security, and here we need to find balance as well. So, yes.
Agree. Thank you very much, Victoria. And now, Dr. Thurston, I certainly would like to pick up your brain again on business role and the status of technology in energy transitioning. But also, I would like you to shed a light on the impact of the whole thing of this business of transitioning and market shifting on marginalized communities and groups globally and within the single countries. Because we were discussing just a transition, equity of transition, and how different communities with very little access to security and to energy can be unequally impacted by the transition itself. So would you please?
Yeah, it's a big topic to bring up here at the end. But I mean, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I think what we have to keep in mind, as we sort of wrap up this particular conversation, is that the vast majority of people that we share this world with do not have the ability to engage in this conversation. And that's the bottom line. Many communities around the world are doing the best with the resources that they have to work with. And access to finance, access to technology, is sort of a remote prospect, but more importantly, access to the political conversation around what should our energy future look like. Many, many, many people are excluded from that conversation. They're excluded from that conversation here. They're excluded from that conversation around the world. And why is that? Well, it just comes back to who has power, right? And so back to bringing in the business sector and the private sector, that is a segment of the global economy that has immense power, is going to be clearly massively influential in dictating how this transition plays out at a very high level. It's also going to be massively important in dictating and determining these issues of equity and justice and how they play out in individual communities. Back to and what model do we have to point to, right? In energy systems, the model we have to point to is the private sector's role in developing, extracting, and selling fossil energy resources throughout history. And that has generally not been a good news story in terms of how those corporations have wielded power and the impacts they have had on global populations. And so what we're trying to do now is sort of leapfrog to a new paradigm, not only in terms of technology, but I think in terms of engagement. And there's this sort of massive call around the world for particularly those who are disadvantaged, those who've been left out, to have a greater say and a greater voice in conversations around all of these transitions, whether it's energy or industry or agricultural or geopolitics. And that could be, you know, a game changer, certainly in helping to enhance equity. But there's this sort of deep competition at the moment, I think, between the top-down forces of big government and big corporation and the bottom-up grassroots voices of the people, vying for legitimacy, vying for influence, and vying for power. And I think we've seen some, you know, we've seen some success stories where, you know, those who've historically not had access to power, been able to make a difference, been able to drive change, particularly in the legal system and in court cases. But I think we have to acknowledge that, you know, we're not, back to the issue for global governance, we're nowhere near on the verge of reshaping, you know, global power dynamics between the public and private sector in a way that I think is going to genuinely elevate, you know, those sort of disempowered communities that have historically suffered from these decisions.
Wow, Benjamin, I can't think of a better ending of the webinar than these very powerful ideas and this global power dynamics between private and public. Also highlighted the other important aspect of the entire game, which is, you know, the political economy, domestic political economy, and the international political economy. And, you know, the question of losers, winners always, you know, come back, and also innovation. And whether we, you know, as a humankind, we come to a point where we really appreciate the common threats and the common opportunities at the moment that we have. If, you know, humans, I mean, you know, people on their behalf acting to just make this stage dealing with the climate change, environmental hazards and threats, and all these emerging threats to motivate more of a common understanding and a common ground for global act in order to address these challenges, which is the most important pressing in our age. I thank you very much for this wonderful discussion. I very much enjoyed it. It's very exciting, very intellectual, very deep. Thanks to all of our distinguished speakers. If one thing, you know, stick into mind is that this is a much more needed discussion on at least 4 important issues again: and the security, energy security, transition, local communities or marginalized communities, and the private-public dynamics, how that will shape and reshape not only global power dynamics, but also determine the trends in security, in energy transition. I also would like to thank EPC, Immerse Policy Center, for hosting and organizing this webinars and other webinars, of course. And I thank all the attendees, and I apologize if we could not, because of the time limitation, take all of the questions or comments. I thank you again and hope to see you in another webinar or in person during COP28. Thank you all.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.